Do you want to be part of something bigger? At Siemens, we use AI to transform the everyday. Our engineering solutions drive innovation and change. We're leading in technology and building a sustainable future. Join Siemens and make an impact to transform the everyday. Apply now and be part of something extraordinary. Visit siemens.co.in/careers.
Today on CityCast Pittsburgh. 3 weeks ago, a 9-year-old was on her bicycle at the corner of Rosedale and Tacoma in the city's East End. It was a few days before school started, and she wasn't far from her house. There's no stop sign there at the intersection, and a driver came through. The little girl was hit and taken to Children's. She later died. Her name was Courtney Carter, and today we are talking again about what's happening and what needs to happen to keep cyclists of all ages safe on Pittsburgh roads. It's Monday, September 9th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with CityCast executive producer and a city cyclist, Mallory Falk.
Hey, Megan. I wish we weren't here talking about this right now, but this little girl, Courtney Carter, she died at this intersection in Homewood where neighbors have been asking for some kind of traffic calming measure for a while now, I understand. Something like a stop sign or a speed bump. And to just know that there were people who foresaw this happening, tried to prevent it, and now a child is dead. It's just really horrible.
It really, really is. We have heard here at CityCast that the city's now committed to installing a stop sign. There was a community meeting there at the Promise Center of Homewood last week to make space for questions and community care, and also just to talk about what happens now. It is all just so sad because data show deaths like Courtney Carter's are also very preventable.
Yeah, and last week, bike safety advocates and children from Courtney's after-school group held a vigil and a short bike ride in her honor in Homewood, and they installed a ghost bike near the spot where she was hit. It all just reminded me of another recent memorial for a cyclist named James Mills, who was hit and killed at Stanwix and Liberty earlier this year. There's a ghost bike there now, too. It's one that I pass every time I ride into work. Just a reminder that the city is still not fully safe for cyclists.
Yeah. So part of what we wanted to do here today is to replay an episode that we recorded shortly after Mills died in the spring. I am sad to say that everything that you're going to hear today is still very, very relevant here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, we're getting into why it's so hard to catalog road injuries, how using our city's 311 system could help, and what city planners are trying to do to keep everyone safe.
Ghost bikes themselves are kind of this newer phenomenon, right? Like, we've kind of grown up with them, but they've only actually been around for the last 20 years or so. You paint a bicycle solid white and install it in the spot where a person was killed.
They serve both as a memorial to the cyclist who was struck and killed at the location, but also as a reminder to drivers to be more careful when they're, navigating our streets. They need to understand that there's people out there who are walking, they're biking, they're trying to get where they need to go. And we all need to be careful and drive appropriately, especially when you're in a place like downtown Pittsburgh.
That's Eric Borer, the advocacy director for Bike Pittsburgh, which, for years now has been really leading the charge on driving policy change in Pittsburgh and all across Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. They envision a city where people don't need a car to get around every day, which, when we're talking about ghost bikes, just feels so far away.
It does, but that's part of why we're talking about this right now. Mills died last month, and that was just a few weeks after City Council and Mayor Ed Gainey had formally committed to Vision Zero.
I pulled the actual language of the council resolution. It said, quote, reducing traffic fatalities and serious injuries in road traffic in the city of Pittsburgh to zero, end quote. And, now that we've committed to this, it brings Pittsburgh into kind of this international movement or conversation. If they stick to it, it also means bringing multiple city departments together to work on bringing our death toll, what a weird phrase, down to none.
Yeah, and the number right now is 20 to 25 deaths a year. That's according to Bike Pittsburgh and the city's crash map. About 1/3 of those deaths are usually pedestrians. There's typically one cyclist per year, and then the rest are people who've died in car crashes.
The map, by the way, is worth checking out. It takes a little tinkering to get used to, but it shows all kinds of crashes from 2018 through 2022. So where in the city they happened, the lighting conditions, what kind of crash it was, maybe head-on, side swipe, rear end at an angle, and then if anyone was injured or killed. In 2022, it says 25 people died, which would be the high watermark for this period. And in previous conversations from Bike Pittsburgh, they estimate 21 people died last year, so 2023.
Those numbers are just way too high. I know the city's also promised to keep working on something called a high injury network map, which is just what it sounds like, a map of known problem areas. Megan, I sent this map to you. Can you tell me what you notice about the labeled yellow lines there?
Yeah, that it's basically every major road in the city. So if you zoom out a little, it just looks like a normal map of Pittsburgh.
It's weird and pretty disconcerting, right? This high injury network map was built on that crash data you were just talking about. So the same period, 2018 to 2022, it includes more than 2,400 miles of roadway, including ones the city itself doesn't own because, according to their methodology, the city, A, needs to know if crashes are happening there, and B, if they might still be able to contribute some periphery thing to make it more safe, like maybe lighting or traffic signals or something else.
Yeah, and then just glancing at this, I'm assuming no tunnels. And I could be wrong, but I don't think I see any bridges technically either.
Right. No interstates, no ramps, and they cut 65 because, as they put it, it has no city-maintained components.
But still so many yellow lines to this thing. When I look at it, to me, it says most of the city is high injury.
Yeah, it does not inspire a lot of confidence about navigating the city safely. The city says this is where they'll start working on ways to make these spaces safer, for everybody really who uses the road. So cyclists, pedestrians, scooters, people in wheelchairs or another mobility device.
And even car drivers.
Right.
But, when we talk about our wheelchair users in particular, so many city advocates historically have just said we haven't done enough. We pulled some tape from Alyssa Grishman with Access Mob Pittsburgh. We talked to her a while back about her experience as a wheelchair user in the city.
My wheelchair is my freedom. I have multiple sclerosis. I can walk through my house, but I can't walk or stand for very long. I get dizzy, I fall, I hurt. And so I use my wheelchair. My wheelchair is a tool that I use to get out, the same as, someone who doesn't want to carry their child has a stroller because carrying a child is tiring. For me, walking is tiring, so I have a wheeled thing to get around. In a world that had great sidewalks, sliding doors, ramps, I wouldn't be disabled. I'd be able to get everywhere just the same as, someone who's currently able-bodied is able to do now. It's the world that creates the disability, not my chair.
I feel like that perspective is just so important because we forget that so much of this goes back to just smart design. Right. And Alyssa is a huge advocate of our city system 311, which, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you have definitely heard us talk about. It's the city's non-emergency, so please come deal with this phone line.
Yeah, in the past, I'd always thought of it more as the nebby neighbor line, like that the neighborhood busybody would use to vent about, the color of trim someone used on their house. But I've learned there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, in this case, it's also a tool that could help with road safety. So friend of the pod, Armin Sammy, is a very vocal advocate for bicycle and pedestrian safety here in the city. He actually created an International 311 Day for folks to celebrate on March 11th every year by going out in groups and helping each other file reports together. Mallory, I was very sad you missed this one. It was right before you came back from your leave. But here he is talking about his approach to using it.
You need to have patience. You need to understand the city has a paving schedule, right? It's not like they can just fill potholes whenever. They can't do it in winter. They really have a schedule they work by. So understanding that the city has constraints goes a long way, and being polite to the 311 operators, because they're not the ones who's decided not to fix her pothole, right? They're just passing on the message.
Yeah, and now I know it's a service you can really use year-round for all sorts of different stuff.
Yeah, a car parked in the bike lane, for example, could be a pothole, could be down limbs, broken street signs. I personally have used it for trees that were just huge and overgrown, blocking sidewalks, or like a dead animal on the side of the road, or trash that's been dumped somewhere, or overflowing city trash cans. There's so many uses.
Yeah, really anything you've got eyes on that could make the city better if only officials knew about it.
Yeah. And I mean, Armin says it's worked. So that's how we got the pills, those little concrete ovals up on Penn Avenue on the bike lane. Bike Pittsburgh had been advocating for it for, I think, 10 years. But with 311 reports organized by Armin, users were able to report around 800 cars in the way of that bike lane over a 6-month period.
Not surprised.
So they were able to build on existing advocacy that had already been going for a long time. And suddenly, boom, protections. Imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who uses that bike lane a lot, I have definitely benefited from those pills. I did not know this was the origin story. So consider this my endorsement of 311. So, Megan, do we know how many people actually use 311?
The city told us that they processed about 103,000 requests in 2023.
Wow. That's the number of reports, right? Not the actual number of people, because I'm sure there are some frequent flyers.
Yes, that is the number of reports. Armin tells the story of a guy who was just incensed this spring at the city for not plowing the bike lanes after our last big snowfall, and submitted over 100 reports by himself for 2 days straight.
Wow, that is commitment.
So like this whole thing is a dispatch service. So if you call, they do try to triage the need and send someone out when they can. And like Armin said, sometimes it's just like not the time of year that they can do your request, but they put it on a list for later. If you're curious about how to do this and what to expect, other than literally dialing 311, because that is obviously the easiest option, you can check our show notes. We've got a whole page dedicated to walking you through it.
Service journalism here.
But part of why we're talking about it again is because there's this new push to use 311 for something else. So one of the limitations of our existing crash data, all the stuff that goes into that crash map that we were talking about, is that a crash report is only generated if there's an injury worthy of the hospital or if a vehicle, so a 4-wheel or more moving vehicle, needs to be towed.
Wait, really?
Yeah. So that was new information to me this year. So you don't tow a bicycle, obviously.
Right.
If a car hits you as a pedestrian and you're okay, but maybe your life was in danger, there's just no record of that. So the city's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure has started telling users to please file a report using 311 if you experience what they're calling a quote unquote near miss.
This is wild to me that this is the avenue for recording these near misses and trying to get data on this, like the line that you're supposed to call for tree branches.
I mean, I think it's kind of brilliant. Like it's an existing city infrastructure. They already have a method for going about it, and it allows them to like tap into people that are already doing it to do this other thing that they also need like user generated info for. I think it's cool.
What about if I don't get hit, but there's like a really close call, like I have to dramatically swerve out of the way of a car or slam on my brakes or something, all things that I've had to do, especially in this downtown area?
Mallory, I'm pretty sure I've seen you do at least one of those things in like the last few weeks while we're both commuting in at the same time. So you report everything. So a near miss, quote unquote, may be an imperfect term, but it's factoring in multiple things. So it could be that you did get hit in some way, but you are okay. Your bike is okay, but like you experienced something that left you feeling shaken, but physically okay.
Yeah.
There could be not getting hit, but feeling like you're in danger or, you know, actually being in danger. And there could be not getting hit, but being just scared, being put in a position in traffic that you should just never need to be in.
Okay, so anytime the vibes are off and you think the city could actually fix it.
1,000%. And there's some data behind that. So Scott Bricker, Bike Pittsburgh's executive director, he told us earlier this year that in 2022, there were 300 crashes involving bicycles and pedestrians just in the city of Pittsburgh. Now, I crossed that with the city's crash map, and they show 224. But Bike Pittsburgh sometimes tracks things that don't make it into official reports, so we'll split the difference. Anyway, we can extrapolate that those are just the people that needed to be hospitalized or taken in for treatment. So none of the other people who experienced something sketchy or maybe got very minorly hurt and walked away, like we don't know for sure if they were captured at all. So I think it's really cool and important that we figured out a way to track some of this, reporting where you were, what you experienced to 311, so that we can get this more accurate picture of our problem areas and add some more nuance to that high injury network map we were just kind of laughing about.
Right, because it shouldn't take someone getting like grievously injured or dying for these spots to be on officials' radars. I wonder what the difference in terms of numbers will be, but I guess it's probably too soon to tell.
I mean, officially, yeah, I think it probably is. But I was actually texting with Armin this morning because he started asking for folks to do this, to, file their near misses with 311 back in March. And he says he thinks it's working. So if you look at our city's historical crash data right now, for example, around that intersection where James Mills was fatally hit, there's just not much there. So what I saw was 2 incidents in 5 years, a pedestrian injured in 2018 and a bicyclist that was sideswiped in 2021. Just 2. But in a few months of just anecdotal data collected by Armin through users of his product, Dashcam for your bike, look at this heat map he sent over. Mallory, I'm sharing the graph that he sent me.
Oh, wow. This is really telling. Like there's some scattered around the East End, a little on what looks like East Carson Street. I'm seeing a few on the north side. But the rest are downtown, and the brightest spot is that same intersection where James Mills was killed.
Yeah, which I think speaks to something that Eric Borer, the advocacy director with Bike Pittsburgh, told me too, that it's been really hard to quantify before now, but people who bike and walk in Pittsburgh know that this intersection really sucks. You know, Mallory, that this intersection sucks. So now this gives them an opportunity to finally gather some data and maybe move the needle on getting a more permanent solution to a longstanding problem that very recently resulted in loss of life.
I really hesitate to call this an accident. I don't like using that term. And, it's like when you have a situation where you have an on-ramp from a highway entering a dense city network where you have people walking, you have people biking. We know that there's going to be crashes, but this is what we're dealt with and what we're pushing for, and we're hoping that the city can correct.
Yeah, and so that's what Eric says. All of this is about applying data to issues that people have been aware of, but to try to get some movement on it, right?
Yeah. Something I'm thinking about here, though, is that in some ways, safety measures are really only as good as drivers' willingness to heed them. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, that area downtown, there are bike lanes. There is a traffic light specifically for bikers at the intersection of Penn and Stanwix. And yet, even with all of this infrastructure there, someone still died. Yep. There's still a lot of near misses on that map. Just the other day, I was biking down Penn near Stanwix, and there was a truck just straight up parked in the bike lane. And when the driver pulled out, they drove right over this barrier, this pole that was in the middle of the lane. It just kind of warped as it went under the truck. And so I feel like, as long as there are times when drivers disregard the protections that are put in place, cyclists and pedestrians will not be totally safe on the streets here.
Yeah. And I mean, we've had a bunch of new listeners since one of our first conversations with Armin on this show. But it was because of this video he took that went Pittsburgh viral, where a local police officer was parked in a bike lane. And when Armin approached him about moving it, the officer told him to get a life. And I mean, our whole question with that was if a cop is not going to respect the rules around bike lanes, the people that would theoretically be enforcing these rules, what does that say about the city's appetite for change?
Yeah. And I mean, for the city to be a safer place for bikers and pedestrians, obviously safety measures are huge, but I think there also needs to be a shift away from our, I guess, car supremacy, you could call it.
Yeah.
And this idea that like everyone, including police officers, can just like treat bike lanes as optional.
But I think that's one of the really important things, too, that like this commitment to Vision Zero is, and I'm going to be idealistic about it. Like that's the moment where the city is saying, no, this is a commitment.
Right.
And city council doubles down and says, yep, we're in too. So I think hopefully maybe this is step one towards addressing some of that stuff, Mallory. One of the things that struck me from my conversation with Eric was also just acknowledging human error and all of this. Like people will make mistakes. That is human. That is the human condition. But if we designed better streets for them to be on, where people can't go fast and that prioritized our most vulnerable users, then some of these mistakes wouldn't be so deadly.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, stepping back, taking stock, there's this new 311 push. We've got the high injury network map and a crash data map. What else is the city doing to try to reach this goal of, zero traffic deaths?
So in the short term, they say they're going to form a fatal crash response team. So a dedicated crew that goes out to fatal crashes and tries to figure out what went wrong in a more holistic way, and whether improvements from the city could maybe make a difference in the future. And then they're also forming a Vision Zero task force. I assume those will be folks with like more of a bird's eye view on all of this stuff, probably reporting to the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure and the mayor or his team. That's how that stuff usually works. We'll have to wait and see.
Is there a timeline for any of that?
No timeline. And that seems to be a lingering concern of Bike Pittsburgh's, but they are still taking the win. The city has really ramped up its traffic calming as all this has been happening too. Mayor Gainey said over and over that it is the most common request the city gets. And you can see them all online sort of too. Once again, this is another sort of hard to read map that I do not find very user friendly. But if you zoom in, you can get a sense of your neighborhood and what stage it's in for consideration.
Yeah, we'll have a link to it in the show notes, but it shows where projects have been completed, what's under evaluation, which streets are not eligible for traffic calming, and what spots have been chosen for some level of construction. There are a couple projects in progress right now in Homewood. Speed humps, which are lower than speed bumps. I recently learned these are two distinct things. And then also speed tables, which are those like strips of rivets that kind of rattle your car when you ride over them.
So to recap, there are a bunch of ways to get involved here in Pittsburgh if you feel so compelled. Number one, you can request traffic calming in your area or somewhere you frequent. The spot does need to be owned by the city of Pittsburgh and must be a maximum of 2 travel lanes.
Number two, if you have a near miss that feels really scary in a spot where it seems unsafe, you can report to 311.
Or just if you see something that's generally making the city feel less safe for you than you think it should be.
Yeah. And then number three, if you are looking for community, Bike Pittsburgh always has events and classes on their website. A bunch of them are free, so it's a great group to get involved with.
And number 4, our buddy Armin has the gear to help you capture any unsafe conditions that you might come across. So I mentioned it before really briefly, but the app is called Dashcam for your bike. It is free and it makes it really easy to report any problems without interrupting your ride in the moment. You can do it later safely. It doesn't run down your phone battery or hog up your storage space. And he even made a little bike mount that helps absorb the bike shock. And then Armin has also separately founded a new group, Pittsburgh Bike Jam. So you can plug in with them too.
So a few updates since we recorded all of that in May. Both the Fatal Crash Response Team and the Vision Zero Task Force seem to be in motion, at least in some way. We called the city to confirm who's on these teams or how they're working now. We're still waiting to hear back.
Yeah, and we mentioned a community meeting that happened in Homewood last week. As we understand it, that included neighbors and a couple of folks from the city, trauma specialists, others. They talked about what happened and possible next steps, including installing at least one stop sign in the intersection where 9-year-old Courtney Carter was hit.
And then separately, traffic calming measures have ramped up this summer, too. Crews were out at Grandview Avenue, along and up from all the overlooks, for example, just last week. There's more planned for the North Side, Regent Square, Lawrenceville, and more. The city's website shows almost 1,900 applications in progress right now. Also, City Council is poised to vote this week on automated cameras that ticket drivers who run red lights. They haven't said where those cameras might be installed, just that it'll be based on crash data.
And if you want to get more involved, particularly over in Homewood, there is a petition online for folks. It's really designed for folks who live in the neighborhood to sign, asking Mayor Ed Gainey and Councilman Kahari Mosley and others to act quickly to invest in the neighborhood and make it safer for everyone. For his part, Mosley has been pretty vocal since Carter died about getting something done. But even if you don't live in the area, you could still call Mosley's office or your own council person and tell them you care about your neighbors in Homewood as well. We'll put a link to that petition in the show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. We'll have more about all of this probably in upcoming shows and definitely in our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter, so please make sure you're subscribed. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Talk to you soon. I feel like you got a little touch of NPR voice here at the end.